The Super Bowl is in the books. Congratulations. Back to the NBA and post-trade deadline, what the rest of the season is going to look like. Welcome to Chucking Darts, a podcast of informed, rigorous, reckless, harmless, speculative, and fun predictions about the game you love. And you can call me Chuck. This is episode number 195. Episode number 194 was last week, and that was in the immediate aftermath of the trade deadline. More sort of just very quick, by my standards, reactions. That was a solo episode that was, I think, about 40 minutes. The Knicks trade, the Mavs acquiring Dan Gafford and PJ Washington, the Boston Celtics getting a couple bench pieces from recent draft classes, the Oklahoma City Thunder acquiring Gordon Hayward, and I spoke a little bit, just a couple minutes about the Philadelphia 76ers, but I saved them for this week and a more involved look at the deadline for this week because I knew I was having on TrillBroDude, known as Trill from the You Know Ball Patreon, on my show again. He co-hosts the You Know Ball podcast with Sam Sheehan. He is the overlord of the You Know Ball Discord and streams frequently on playback with a very enthusiastic, very fun community. I hopped on there once, and within 30 seconds, they were both like two people in his Discord ragged on me for takes I'd had a year ago on his podcast. It really is a one of a kind community. So, Trill, welcome back. How are you?
I'm good. I'm glad that we have them to keep us in check. You know what I mean? All my haters make me famous is what I say in the Discord. So uh thank you for having me back on. I'm excited. I'm glad that the trade deadline is over, and I'm glad that we are in the home stretch. We're getting closer to the playoffs because the trade deadline is always a crazy time for me. But this year we had another incredible deadline. Not in terms of names moved, really, just in terms of getting excited over Simone Fontecchio getting traded for a second round pick, and our annual tax dodging moves like Daniel House and a second round pick to the Detroit Pistons. We were really living it up on the Slopfest stream this year. So excited to talk about it now that it's over and we can reflect back on it.
Well, yeah, you and Sam do such a good job covering slop, covering the constant churn of rumors and then actual, confirmed trades. But I can only imagine that the deadline, I think a lot of NBA fandom works this way with this time of year, is like there's a catharsis and then there's almost like a lull because
Yep.
it's finally over and then everyone just sort of exhales. All-Star breaks coming this weekend, so there's not going to be, regular season games, and you sort of enter the dog days a little bit. Now for guys like you and myself, like there aren't really dog days. We're not ever like not paying attention to the league when, there's games going on. But I think it's an interesting time to sort of reassess where the entire league is because this seems to me to be a pretty wide open year. I think, that has been sort of the party line for a couple years now as the talent in the league has accumulated and it's gotten so deep that now where an inner circle of contenders may have been, four teams 5 years ago, now it might be eight or nine teams this year. And since all these moves have been done, not only with the deadline immediately happening last week, but the bigger moves, James Harden, Pascal Siakam, OG Anunoby, since we've all seen them with their teams and the effect that they have had, I think that we can take sort of a deeper look at the title picture. We'll probably do that more in earnest later in the episode, but if there's anything coming to mind for you about someone who you think in the last couple of months has really changed their fortunes as far as title chances are, does any team spring to mind?
What's really funny is that I don't know if I would say title chances because I feel like 2 months ago, I feel the same exact way about teams that can win the title. Now, get to the conference finals, make the finals. I feel differently. Like the Knicks certainly could if the bracket breaks the right way and they get some injury luck and the way that they've been playing when they've been healthy, absolutely could make a conference finals run. And honestly, I think they match up probably about as good with Boston as any team does in the Eastern Conference. So I would say they might even have a dark horse Miami Heat style run in them to get to the NBA Finals. I don't think they can win the championship, though. I think that they're still one major move away. The team that has, I'll just put it like this: the team that has rose up my board, and I'm not sure if I would even consider them like legit championship contenders, but the team that has rose up my board, even though I didn't even love their deadline, is the Dallas Mavericks. And I have been kind of skeptical of this team for about 2 years now. I've basically hated every move they've made. But
plenty of room to rise up the board.
exactly. But I think one of the things that we've constantly talked about on our podcast, in just the NBA world in general, is that when you get to the playoffs, the best way to win in 2024, I think, is to create the best shot quality possible on every single possession in a game.
Mm-hmm.
And there are very few players and very few teams like Luka Doncic and like the Dallas Mavericks that can create a good shot on basically every single possession.
Mm-hmm.
It's, to me right now, it's like the real contenders, which is like the Nuggets, the Celtics, whoever. And then you have the Mavericks as this kind of dark horse. They're in the 8 seed right now. They added Daniel Gafford at the deadline. They got PJ Washington in. Like I said, I don't love all the value they gave up for those guys. I felt like it was a high risk move. But when you have Luka Doncic now entering his prime, a potentially generational playoff performer, a guy who is a one-man offense in himself and just needs the appropriate talent around himself to really win a series and even win multiple series like he did 2 years ago. I think Dallas this year has moved from my like play-in team, no chance they win a series, to like, I wouldn't be shocked if we see them in the conference finals, and who knows what happens from there.
So that's awesome. I was very complimentary of the Mavericks on my last episode. Like, while acknowledging that the pick value they gave up was legitimate, I feel like I'm just gonna I feel like I'm Zach Lowe being like, I said, and then just repeat your same take. But the key to me with them is that what they've done over the last 12 months is that, like, Luka is such a floor and ceiling raiser. He's such a like an offense unto himself, even if they don't play completely heliocentrically now that they have Kyrie, that if you just get a little bit bigger at each position around him, the offense is not going to suffer. That's normally the question. That's sort of like the exchange you have to make in the NBA, is that if you are opting for size, then you're probably losing some guard skill here or there. You're losing some dribble, pass, shoot equity at a couple other positions. And you end up with a team like the Mavs were a couple years ago that made the conference finals, where it was Luka and a bunch of just standstill catch and shoot wings around him, Bullock, Finney Smith, that crew. But now, Gafford and Lively having a vertical lob threat for 48 minutes, basically, for Kyrie and Luka to play off of, that's the shot quality that you're talking about. Is that action is going to be so hard to constantly defend and rep out for any defense, that I agree with you. And PJ, people forget, PJ Washington has like a 7'2" wingspan. He is a legit wing who can guard big wings. And so since this, and I mean, Omax isn't really going to play for much in the playoffs this year, but they just have gotten bigger and their offense is still nuclear. And I think that's what makes them a contender. Where I struggle with them is a question that I sort of come back to frequently in trying to see where the league's going and do the predictions that I do on this show, which is how like patient a process is it actually? How quickly does stuff come together actually? So, and with them, the biggest factor there is Derek Lively. By the way, is that Dewey?
This is Dewey. Yeah, this is Dewey. He's trying to make
Dewey.
an appearance on the podcast. He
That's
wants to be a
awesome.
star.
Yeah, he is a great big shining star.
Yeah.
But to me, Lively is a rookie center who just turned 20 like this week. So he is a baby.
Mhm.
And if you plan on playing someone that young, big playoff minutes, history says like you're not making the finals. Like that's just never happens. And I think the Gafford acquisition mitigates that a little bit, but like Lively is going to play. But if you're going to apply that rubric to the Mavericks, you got to apply it to the Thunder because the Thunder have not yet played a playoff series with their crew. Chat's a little bit older, but he's still a rookie. And again, unless you're Tim Duncan and Duncan was 23 years old, like you're not, it's just not going to happen. So, I think there is, and I think Duncan, it was even his second year that they went to the finals and won it, not his rookie year. So, like,
there's a lockout year too, so that doesn't count.
That's right. Thank you, Phil. So I think once you start going down that line of sort of historical thinking about who we can eliminate, it can be sort of like, I guess, misleading because you can also say like, well, the game is so different than it was 20 years ago. It's all about this offensive explosion. But you, I feel like, are someone who does sort of rely on history. I remember you came on this podcast for a similar episode last year talking about the Durant trade to Phoenix.
Right.
Feels like it's been 3 years since he's been in Brooklyn. And we agreed that like a midseason acquisition of this magnitude where you're reorienting your offense midseason, like they were not going to win the West. And we agreed on that. So do you feel as though there are teams, and I know you said you're not picking Dallas to make the finals, but are there teams that you feel like you can eliminate based on like, do you think that the Clippers acquired James Harden early enough to where they can still make the finals the same year? Same with the Knicks with Anunoby, or I guess the Pacers if you wanted to go that way.
That's different to me than the conversation we had before because they've had a lot of time to integrate. Also, that's more like when the Sixers got Jimmy Butler like 2 weeks into the season back in whenever that was, 2018, 2019. That team, obviously we didn't win the championship, but you know, we lost in 7, about as close as you can to the eventual champions, and I thought had a legit shot at winning the title. The Harden stuff, they got their bumps and bruises early. They figured it out. They've been kind of hitting the ground running. And I actually, I look at the Western Conference and I see all of it is just matchup based for me, which is an easy cop out to be like, oh, well, it's all matchup based. But like, especially in this Western Conference where like, I love the Minnesota Timberwolves. I think they're an awesome team. I think what Anthony Edwards has been able to do and how they've kind of rebounded from their clunky first year with Rudy Gobert, and they've put an elite defense around their offensive talent. I think that is great. I also think that if they face the wrong matchup in the first round, like the Dallas Mavericks,
there you go.
You could be looking at a situation where I just don't trust their offense to generate as good of looks, and I don't think that they can slow down a talent like Luka Doncic that operates from the perimeter, despite having fantastic perimeter defenders and Rudy Gobert on the back line. So I kind of look at this and say it is wide open, and I think that the OG trade is a little bit different to me too, because OG, while he is such a defensive force, his offensive role is so simple. You can kind of put him on any team. You know, he's a guy that's going to make the extra pass. He's going to stand in a corner and nail corner three. I've basically always described him as like super PJ Tucker, which is like, you know,
my God, that is brutal. But I go ahead.
Why is that brutal?
Because everyone knows what you mean when you say PJ Tucker. PJ Tucker,
hold on. PJ Tucker 6 years ago when he was on the Houston Rockets. I'm not talking about this PJ Tucker.
Okay,
all right. 6 years ago when he was in the Houston Rockets. And was one of the best role players, you know, kind of whatever, muck it up. OG is essentially the same kind of player, but a much better version of that player. A guy who is going to be able to be kind of you know, I don't want to say a defense all to himself, but like as far as wings go, he's probably one of the closest things that you can get to that. He's going to fit on basically every team because he has a simplified offensive role and because he can just complement star talent really well. And I look at that trade and say, I know he's been injured and he kind of low key has an injury history that worries me a little bit. I don't really think it gets talked about a lot because he was on Toronto on some not very good teams, but, I think that his should be smooth. Harden, they've had enough time to figure it out. And I think the Pacers are a fun story. I don't really view them in the same tier as contenders for this year, at least. And I think that the Siakam thing, hasn't really worked out as well as I thought it would so far. And they're going to kind of need to figure that out over the course of the rest of the season. And they might be better next season when I think they can even get a little bit of cap space this summer. They should be able to make some more moves, and their young guys should take another step too. So I don't really think there was a trade this year where we can have a parallel to last year to say that it can affect the title race in the same way, because the one team that made the biggest splash with the Siakam move that happened close to the deadline isn't really a contender to me. And then the Knicks have a seamless fit in OG, and then the Harden thing, they've had so much time to figure it out. And like I said, it's all about matchups. I like the Clippers' chances against a lot of teams. I don't like their chances against like a Minnesota Timberwolves, who can really get into, like, we've seen it. I think they've played 3 times this year, and every time they play, Paul George and James Harden's life is just really, really hard. And if they are going to hit their highest ceiling, their highest end outcome, of course it's going to be with a healthy Kawhi Leonard, which is what everyone will talk about to death.
Yeah.
But the other thing is that, like, while James Harden had some great games for the Sixers in the playoffs, he also had some of his worst that he's ever had. And Paul George, as great of a talent as he is an amazing of career he's had, he also has some disappearing acts in the playoffs. So, like, that's the thing about the West to me this year, is that it's all about matchups.
Do you think that there's a team that's well suited to beat the Denver Nuggets in a series, or would you give the Nuggets the edge in just about any of these matchups?
I would give the Nuggets the edge, but I'm not kind of the mindset that they're this like unbeatable shoe-in to make the finals. Like I kind of think that's been the narrative throughout the course of the whole season, because they won the finals last year, because Jokic has been, arguably the best player for like 3 or 4 years now. And I think that is just like, oh, that's just assumed. It's extremely hard to repeat in the NBA. I mean, we talk about it like all the time, is like, there's a reason why the KD Curry Warriors are like the last team to repeat, and there really hasn't been much around that in terms of repeating. Like, there's been a new champion basically every year. Well, some of that is injury, some of that is trade, some of that is whatever. But like, the thing that they have over the advantage over almost everyone is the continuity aspect. Like, their starting 5 is now playing for their second full season together. They've had a playoff run already. They have, probably the best player in the conference. In a series, can he get outplayed by Luka Doncic or someone of that level? Sure. But the reality of that team to me is, like, we always talk about, like, you play 8, you trust 7. Who are the 2 bench guys that they really trust? And can they get enough production out of those guys? Because they're always going to have the advantage of going up a level in the playoffs because of Jokic and Murray, but they're also going to have a chance more so because they never run their best lineups during the regular season. I feel like this doesn't really get talked about, and that's part of the reason why Jokic's on-offs are like as crazy as they are, is that like they play DeAndre Jordan real minutes, and like he never sees the floor in the playoffs. And they go small with Aaron Gordon at the 5 in the playoffs. They don't do that during the regular season pretty much at all unless they have injuries. So I think that they're a team that, like, they have the playoff history, they have the best player, they have certainly the highest ceiling of any of these teams. But I think that, like, in a series, I'm not saying that they would win these series, but I think Dallas could give them some trouble with their new interior size that they have. I think that and just Luka being Luka, I think that Minnesota has given them problems and could continue to in a series. Pretty much any team I could see winning the West outside of the Oklahoma City Thunder, I think, are going to be able to have some sort of way to slow down the Nuggets in a way that teams in the West had no chance last year.
Interesting. I think so, like, that bench that you referenced, you would say the first 3 names, I believe they are all currently healthy, would be Christian Brown, Reggie Jackson, Peyton Watson. And Watson, is another puppy, not technically a rookie, but mostly a rookie this year, first real extended minutes at the NBA level. And the thing that I'm focused on with Denver is that the narrative surrounding them as defending champions, and even the narrative surrounding this player before they were champions, was like, oh, well, in the playoffs, Jamal Murray's just a killer. And he has been. There hasn't been anything. He has never had a playoffs where he hasn't been very, very good. But there is such a contrast between his streakiness in the regular season with how consistently incredible he's been in the playoffs that it would not stun me if if the ball just didn't go in for, like, he's such a tough shot maker. That's
Yeah.
how, like, in the playoffs all last year you saw it, but like the degree of difficulty on his shots is high. And I think you know, in a perfect version of that offense, he doesn't have to work as hard for his stuff, or he's not taking stuff that's quite so extreme. There's always been sort of an odd couple healthy tension between him and Jokic, because Jokic just wants to get everyone everything at the rim as much as possible to make things as easy as he can. And I think, again, it would have to be the right matchup, but if Murray just goes a little bit cold and then you're dealing with sort of a thin bench that hasn't been there quite yet, like, I think the Nuggets could be beaten, but I also think that Jokic gives them such a stable floor that a team is going to have to, like, beat them. They won't beat themselves. Like, they might give you a chance, but you got to play really, really, really well. And that's where stuff like continuity comes in. So I guess we'll pivot to the deadline here in a moment, but I think out of all the teams out west, I kind of, I don't want to be a prisoner of the moment at all, but I do kind of like the Clippers. I like Ty Lue a lot, and I've watched them during this stretch with Harden. And I know that if we're going by the metric of shot quality, like, when Harden has these bad playoff performances, it's usually, I mean, part of it is effort and just engagement. But another part of it is that, like, he'll just be like, all right, in this quarter, I'll take 6 step back threes, and he'll make one of them, and then the rest of those possessions are just empty, and he's not getting back hard on defense. Like, again, Lou is going to have to push all the right buttons, but I just get the feeling that there's such a high level around him of shot making talent that if he is not as engaged, he will not have to take those shots, or he will not feel as though he has to take those shots. And, like, we can talk about health for any team. Obviously, it's very relevant for the Clips, but as long as that's not an issue, I do kind of believe that they can switch the most defensively, which is like the easiest sort of simple solution to a lot of these crazy offenses that we see, while maintaining lots of offensive optionality. Like I just think they can generate good shots while making it difficult on you in a way that, like, the Wolves, I feel like, will struggle with, or there will always be a your turn, my turn aspect to how they get their looks. Um, but it sounded like you were a bit more skeptical on the Clips just because of the Harden history and stuff like that.
So I've been high on the Clippers pretty much against any team except for Denver and Minnesota. Like, I think they could beat the Thunder. I think they would definitely beat, like, the Pelicans, the Kings, the Lakers, those teams. The thing with me is that I've seen it with James Harden, and it's not even Harden necessarily, because, like, even when Harden is not making shots, like you said, like the step back threes, and then it leads to run out opportunities, whatever, he is more engaged on defense generally in the playoffs. Like, he definitely is not quite as bad as his rep on that end. And he's still creating, like you said, he's creating open looks for his teammates. And this year might be the first year where he's bought into a more minimized role, where he is taking less shots. He's operating more as a playmaker. He's moving the ball more when he is spotting up off the ball. He's taking more catch and shoot threes. He's playing like the idealized version of what he pretty much should have always been doing. Just with, a less scoring punch than he's had in the past because of some physical limitations. But I just worry about a series where you can put a big wing defender on him. Like, we saw it last year in the Boston series, where, like, Marcus Smart started that series on him, and Harden was going at him over and over because Smart is not the defender that he once was years ago. And they put Jaylen Brown on him. And from that point on, he basically had one good scoring game for the rest of the series. And it was a game where he basically just got hot and made a ton of tough threes. I think that there is potential for a situation where teams know that he's going to be looking for those kind of shots, and teams know that he's going to be looking for playmaking opportunities. And when things tend to spiral for him in the playoffs, he turns the ball over a lot. He tries to, he hasn't tried to grift quite as much this year and get to the foul line, but like those always lead to opportunities in the fast break. And like the thing about Minnesota is that I don't trust their half court offense, which is why I wouldn't take, like, I think there's a chance they even get upset in the first round by a
Yeah,
lower seed.
I'd agree.
And that's been my whole thing with Minnesota for like 2 months now. Like I've watched them like time and time again in these close late games not be able to generate the quality of shots, and probably due to the fact that you said it's like it's a your term, my term with Cat and Ant, and it's not quite as a collective as you would like it to be in late game situations, and the decision making isn't always the best, especially when those guys are fatigued. But I'm not blaming this all squarely on James Harden by any means. I think that Clippers team is really good. I think Kawhi Leonard can rise up and be the best player in a series with anyone. And if it's fucking LeBron James, Kevin Durant, whoever, Jokic, Embiid, Giannis, whoever it is, like he could definitely be the best player in any given playoff series. And that is the X factor that they have, that the Mavericks have, that a few of these teams that might not have been considered contenders earlier in the year have, that other teams don't. But I do worry just about like a team that can get into Harden's handle, that can kind of give him problems, that can, lead to some kind of no-show games, which they've been able to survive those this year. Like when they're playing the Pistons, he's had two really, but he's weirdly plays poorly against the Pistons whenever Cade Cunningham plays. It's been like a thing for like 3 years now. But it's one of those things where like when you go up against a team that has athletic, switchy defenders that can kind of like mess with him, it can lead to some like really poor games. And like I'm not saying that I think that they have no like they probably be, if I ranked like not matchup dependent, they'd probably be second or third in the West to me in terms of like teams that can actually win the conference. Like I wouldn't be surprised if it was them and Denver in the Western Conference Finals, and I wouldn't be surprised if they could even beat Denver. But I definitely think there might be one matchup where like it's easier to survive those games in December and January when you're playing against the dregs of the league, and it's a lot harder when you're playing against top end talent in the playoffs. And that's the only thing that I would be concerned with if I'm talking about the Clippers.
Yeah, I mean, part of me, I don't know who I would like actually root for when it came down to it, but there will be a sort of like happiness if either the Wolves or the Clippers come out of the West, since they've been killed for these trades that they've made for multiple years now with all of the pick equity they gave up. Minnesota's case for Gobert, and in the Clippers case for Kawhi. And so or I guess technically Paul George, but basically Paul George and Kawhi. And if either one of them were to actually push through and finally make the finals, then a lot of that would quiet down, which would be nice. But that, is just one consequence of a million that the playoffs will, I guess, render. Going to the trade deadline, I'll approach this in a sort of a bit of a different way. What team do you think hurt themselves the most by standing pat and not making a move? Where do you think there was an opportunity for a team to really get better that they either got outbid on because they weren't aggressive enough, or that they just declined to do entirely?
I mean, this is more a by default thing, I think, because I actually think the teams that stood pat at this deadline pretty much should have. Like, when you consider the players that we know were available and were actually traded, there's not anyone that I would say is like, oh man, that would have changed their life. Like the Warriors, it would have been really nice if the Warriors could have got Kelly Olynyk. They shouldn't be killing themselves over not getting Kelly Olynyk. Like he would have been a great fit with what they do. He would have provided them with some size, obviously good shooter, good passer, would have been a really nice player fit for their system. But ultimately, I think that the fact that the Bulls and the Hawks had the real difference makers at this deadline, and even the Nets, if you want to go further about the teams that didn't sell, I think that the teams like the Warriors and the Lakers can kind of live with not making big trades at this deadline. But I guess if I had to say, I would probably be the Warriors, just because I think the fact that they were one of the few good teams that I know that their record and their standings don't reflect that, but like they're a better team than their record, especially with Draymond Green when he's healthy and not attacking other players. That I think that if they had made one move at this deadline, if they were able to get Alex Caruso somehow from the Bulls,
Yeah, so you've
that would have
heard
been.
this that they had offered him. Do you know exactly what that offer was, or do
I
you
mean,
have a suspicion?
I hear things all the time, and like sometimes I hear things and I go, that doesn't sound right to me. And then I hear things like the Warriors offered Trace Jackson Davis, Gary Payton II, 2 first-round picks and Moses Moody for Alex Caruso, and the Bulls said no. And I'm like, I just can't imagine a world where that is the case. Maybe the Bulls are just committed to the bit and they're like, we're not trading Alex Caruso for anyone. But
Yeah.
that seems like when you could like look, Alex Caruso is a very good player. I would have loved to have him on the Sixers. And I think that if he were to be traded at this deadline, outside of the OGs and the Siakams, the guys that were traded earlier, and Harden, he would have the most effect on like potential title odds, I would say. Just like the level of defensive player that he is that can fit on a lot of teams and would provide real value of the guys that were moved at this deadline. And I just can't imagine that the Bulls value him so much that like we'll get this nice young center, we'll get a flyer on Moses Moody who could be like a decent player. Gary Payton, who's like, he's not healthy all the time, but when he is healthy, he's like 60-70% of Alex Caruso, and 2 first-round picks, and we're good on that. Like I'm skeptical that it was that, but I have heard that they made legit offers and they were trying to like really make moves and the market just wasn't there for them. Like I think that was the case with a lot of buyers at this deadline. Like I think the Lakers, the Warriors, the Sixers ended up making some trades, but ultimately they didn't get like the big fish that I think that they were hoping to become available at this deadline. So sorry, my cat is going insane right now.
It's all
Um,
right. It's all
so
right. I'm enjoying it.
so 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 ultimately I can't really fault anyone who stood pat that was trying to make moves at this deadline, but the Warriors would be the one team that like if they could just get things right and they were able to add a real difference maker, I felt like they were maybe the one team that people could have, been sleeping on, and no one's ever going to sleep on the Warriors really, but like they were the one of these other teams along with the Mavericks that I felt like if they made the right move, they could win a series or two and make a run because you have Steph and Draymond. You never know.
Yeah. I think the Warriors is a good answer. And I also think that who knows what that offer was to Chicago. I think it's safe to assume that they offered something. And as soon as you say, well, they offered something, then you just play the asset game about what the Warriors really have to offer. And it really is those 3 players plus some pick combination. So even if it were just Moody and Trace Jackson Davis and like a first round pick, even that I think the Bulls would have to say yes to. I would think they would have to. Now the Bulls I guess could always trade Caruso this summer because he'll still have a year left on his deal. And maybe they heard our preseason podcast where I went all in on the Bulls hitting their over, and they're
Sure.
like, you'll pry our 39 wins from our cold dead fingers. So maybe that's what's happening, but like that's a very, I don't know, man. I'm a Moses Moody fan. I think that when you look at how Steve Kerr tends not to really give young guys much of a chance, like it's understandable. Kerr came into the league and he almost immediately joined a contender in the Cavaliers, and then he joined the Bulls, and then he joined the Spurs. And the first time he coached it was the Warriors, who were ready to contend. Like he's not a development guy, and he
Yeah.
doesn't
He was the
really know
GM for
how.
the Suns too, right? At one point when they
Yeah,
were
that's
really
right.
good.
Yeah.
He only
So
knows success.
so like
Yeah.
he and it's the 2 timelines thing was funny the minute that it started because it started with like James Wiseman, but it's always going to be difficult to balance it the right way. But Moses Moody has played in the playoffs for them. And Moses Moody is like a very coachable kid, has gotten demonstrably better, especially on defense. That was one of my recent episodes, was talking about Kuminga, and my guy Charlie Cummings, who's at Claytheist11, shouted out Moses Moody for how much better he's gotten on defense. And he's like a real wing who could mature into something a little bit better than that, like maybe a full-time starter. And so I applaud the Warriors for trying, and I guess the Bulls just weren't biting, but they would be my team as well. I also think that I don't know that there was a move for the Lakers really to make besides, going in for DeJounte Murray.
I hated
But
that for them.
you hated it?
I didn't like the fit. Like I like DeJounte removed from a certain context of like the Trae Young fit doesn't work, right? Like we all know that's pretty obvious. He didn't fit with DeMar DeRozan. I know he was a different player when he played with DeMar, but like he didn't fit with DeMar. I'm like, if he doesn't fit with those two, I don't see a world in which he's fitting with LeBron James and Anthony Davis. And like, unless you really believe that his improved 3-point shooting is like completely sustainable. And I didn't like the move at all. Like, I literally think they're better off keeping D'Angelo Russell and just signing Spencer Dinwiddie as a buyout guy than giving up their last first round pick to get DeJounte Murray. Like, it just never made any sense to me.
Mm-hmm. I can understand. Like, I don't even know that I disagree with you, but I also think that I don't talk about the Lakers frequently because they're so veteran laden, so it's not really the area of the NBA that I discuss. But what do you think of their team right now? Like, do you think that they are basically? I remember we had this discussion again preseason because I think I was more optimistic on them than you were. But
Yeah.
what about their team? If you don't believe they're going to win a series, for example, and you think
I don't.
So there you go. So if you think they're not going to win a series, do you think it's just because they are not going to consistently generate good enough offense? Because their defense is pretty good with Davis. So do you think that that's it?
Yeah, I mean, I think, look, can LeBron ramp up? We saw it in the in-season tournament. Of course he can. Like, he's LeBron James. Like, absolutely. But the larger spectrum of this is that they haven't had a top offense since they won the championship. And they've always won with their defense. And yes, maybe they have a playoff defense that's really good just because Anthony Davis is on the court a ton. But the reality is, like, he's been very available this year.
Yep.
LeBron has been very available for his standards at this point in his career this year. And their whole thing is they're now putting offensive piece around these two guys because they're not able to bring them up to a level of offense that can get them to be above league average offense. And if they do that in the playoffs, I'm just skeptical that formula will be completely redoable in the same way that it was last year, where you're playing D'Angelo Russell, Austin Reeves, and Spencer Dinwiddie as your guard rotation. Your best defensive wing is like Cam Reddish, who has been injured and doesn't even really play for them when he's healthy. I know he had moments early in the season. Vanderbilt has this new injury. I don't really know what's going on with him, but while he's a great defensive player, has some offensive issues, certainly. I just think that last year's circumstance that they got themselves into in the playoffs was they were going up against a Grizzlies team that was destroyed. Like, it was like they had injuries, they had the whole Ja Morant thing going on off the court, and also they have like the fact that like I'm still skeptical of the Grizzlies in the playoffs in general. Like, I've kind of always have been. Like, I think they're a really good regular season team, and I'm not sure how much I believe in them winning multiple series with their half court offense and all that stuff. And then you run into a Warriors team that just shot horribly, a team that has historically always shot really well in the playoffs. They shoot absolutely terribly. And Anthony Davis, to his credit, was the best player in that series, and they won with their size and their ability. But I just think the West is much better this year. And I think that they're not going to have a road. It's funny because I was very high on this team until about a month ago, which was the Oklahoma City Thunder. They're the one team I think if the Lakers got them in the first round, I'd be like, they might be able to win this series. Just because their specific weakness is the Lakers' specific strength. And every time they've matched up in the regular season this year, it's shown to be a problem. Where some of those games, like the Lakers, like had like insane shooting the one game, but like they just dominate them on the glass and in the interior. And the Thunder really have not addressed that issue by any means. And that could be the one series where I could see them upsetting. But like if they went up against pretty much any other team at the top, I think that I would fade them in this playoff run if they even make it there in general.
Yeah, it's so weird because the numbers certainly bear out what you're saying about the league average offense or whatever they are, 23rd or something right around there in
They're
offense.
higher now because they've been shooting like crazy recently.
Well, yeah, they had that game against the Pelicans where they scored like 90 points in the
It
first
was
half.
insane. Yeah. It was
But
absurd.
and I guess their defense is probably between, I don't know, 8th and 13th, whatever.
They're 18th in offense, and they are actually fourth in, or no, sorry, that's 15th in defense.
Okay. And see, what's interesting to me is when I look at their team, them playing Reddish, I just can't. I've done an episode on Cam Reddish when the Knicks traded for him from the Hawks a couple years ago. And back then I was like, guys, he's not who you think he is.
Mm-hmm.
And like, I wasn't the first person to say that, but I do understand why the Lakers tried him, because when I look at their team and I think about playoff matchups, their issue to me is guarding at the point of attack, because you're going to play a really good ball handler starting in round one, some alpha wing, whomever it is, and SGA, whomever. And who is their best on-ball defender? Because it's not going to be LeBron. It's not going to be Anthony Davis in the back line. Like, is it going to be D'Angelo Russell is your best on-ball defender? Like, maybe if Gabe Vincent gets healthy, you can try him, but Gabe's been hurt, and I wouldn't assume health for him. So
Gabe's also like 6'2". Like, you're gonna put him on Luka? Like,
yeah,
well, I guess they won't play Luka, but like, you're not gonna put him on SGA,
right? And so that to me, like, is what really is the alarm to me, is like, man, when they get like the opposing ball handler is just going to be very, very comfortable.
Yeah.
In a way that LeBron, for as good as he is, and I think he's been great this year, for what he is like set his mind to doing, I just don't think that he's going to be as comfortable as whatever alpha wing, alpha guard counterpart that they play. But having said all that, like, I think that they should be offensively better than they have been. I think
they will be.
I think the rotations they've been running have been very strange. I think them not showing a lot of faith in Rui. I don't know if Rui was maybe banged up or what was going on there. I think that was odd, and they should play him more. I'm not sweating the Vanderbilt injury that much, because though I like Jared and he's been a positive NBA player, like, when you just don't shoot and you're not a center, like, there's better ways to approach that position.
It's not even that he doesn't shoot, it's that he's like pretty much does nothing on offense. Like even if you put him in the dunker spot, and like, which they have done and like had some general success with, like, he's not going to really even make you pay playing there, which is like, I just don't really know what to do with a guy like that when you're getting deeper into the playoffs. Like, maybe in the right matchup where you can survive that kind of thing, and especially if you're going off, you're tilting all offense towards some lineups with those guys that you mentioned, you might be able to survive it. But what does that do to your defense? Like, my whole thing with them is like, they just don't have any two-way players, and like, I know they had a similar roster last year, but obviously two-way players, with LeBron and AD being two-way players when LeBron cares about defense. But well, I know they had a similar roster last year, but like, keep in mind, one of those games they won against the Warriors because Lonnie Walker came off the bench and just randomly got hot. Like,
Warriors definitely could have won that series.
Yeah, exactly. And like, honestly, I think the Lakers did deserve to win that series, but like, I don't think it's a template that you can use for sustainable success in the playoffs. The only reason I wouldn't totally fade them is because Anthony Davis and LeBron James have been some of the best playoff performers of the last 10, obviously with LeBron 20 years. So I don't think it's kind of similar to the Miami Heat thing, where like, I don't think you can completely write them off because of what they did last year and what they've done over the last 5 years or so. But the reality of what they've been building is like, if you don't have multiple two-way players that aren't your like best guys. I just see that story over and over again in the playoffs, and I feel like other teams can kind of figure out ways to put more two-way guys on the court.
Probably, but I'm keeping my eye on the Lakers just to see, not shooting to the degree that they have been, certainly, but if they become more, they want to be such a defensively oriented team, but I would lean into just
Yep.
Russell, Reeves, LeBron, Rui, Davis, and like those are your five best offensive players, clearly, and just seeing how good that offense can be, because that to me is their better recipe to winning series. You know that LeBron can be engaged on defense and they're going to be able to rebound, and you have AD cleaning up whatever it is that he can clean up. But trying to maximize that offensive talent is interesting to me, because I do really like Reeves and I do really like Rui. Russell, I can't, whatever, but he can certainly get hot. I mean, he
On any,
has.
yeah. I mean,
So,
I've my thing with D'Angelo Russell is like you catch him on the wrong night and you're like, is this guy even a starter? And you catch him on the right night and you're like, oh, this guy's an all-star.
yeah, that's it. The
Yeah.
one-time all-star.
Yeah,
But
exactly.
that, and when you talk about teams that could have made a move, like I know that they are, it's all about this one pick that they have or whatever. But like
They can get 3 this summer. I don't know if you've heard.
I literally haven't, because my eyes glaze over when I hear about Lakers first round picks. But like the Bruce Brown was apparently available for something,
Yeah.
and I don't know how they could have made that. Like I don't know if the Raptors valued Hood Schifino or Max Christie or something like that. But am disappointed that the Lakers did not try to get a point of attack guy. DeJounte could have technically been that, but he's a big name, and that's a more complicated deal.
Yeah. Yeah.
But if you'd gotten a smaller, in a smaller package, a guy who can really perform that function and get into the handle of a really good opposing player, then I think they could have had something. But
I think that
alas,
they
did not.
tried. I think they tried with Bruce Brown. I think that was one of their guys they really liked because he was rumored to have gone there and free. They were ready to offer him the full MLE last summer, and then he got that bag from the Pacers, and he was like, "All right, well, I'm obviously going to take this." So they signed Gabe Vincent to the MLE instead. With the same idea with what you're saying. It's like, can we just get one point of attack guy? Like, can we get someone who can, hold up on that end of the court and also have some offensive ability? And I think they wanted Bruce Brown. And I think what probably happened was they probably offered, my guess is that they offered Rui just because Rui's salary is easier to match for him, and second round picks, and the Raptors, Masai always drives a hard bargain and was like, I'm not taking on a contract for the next few years if I have the ability to get cap space, and I could always trade Bruce Brown later, and I want to try to get a first round pick and whatever and blah blah blah.
Yeah.
So
Yeah,
I agree with you though. He would have been a perfect fit for what they need, really.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, we'll see. I think we are both similarly skeptical about the Lakers, but this summer we'll see if they try to do something. I guess LeBron still has his opt out. I'm just like repeating Brian Windhorst talking points, though. We can move on. This is why I hate talking about the Lakers.
Trae Young's a Laker. I'm telling you. I laughed at the fact because they were linked to Trae Young and Donovan Mitchell, but after the deadline when they did nothing, and I was like, oh, they have to leak this so people don't get mad at them. But then they got Spencer Dinwiddie, and I know Spencer's easy to clown, but like he's 6'5". He's like a 40% catch and shoot guy. He's played off stars before and done a good job doing it. When Spencer Dinwiddie is not good is when you're like, go be James Harden. Like that's when Spencer Dinwiddie really fails to live up to the player that he is. When he's a 6-man playing with off LeBron James and Anthony Davis, I actually think if you were to rank, he would be in the top 10 guys that were traded during deadline week. And I feel like that's something that is really like not being discussed because everyone like doesn't like his personality, and he kind of, has cried his way out of multiple teams. But like he's been on a conference finals team before and like was good in the playoffs for the first 2 rounds in that run. So like, I don't think it's out of this world to expect him to be pretty good for the Lakers, to be honest. But what I was trying to get out there was I completely lost my train of thought.
That's okay. It's okay. That's what happens when you talk Lakers. You just feel like the ground's always been.
That was It was the Trae Young Donovan Mitchell thing. I laughed at the Donovan Mitchell thing, but now that the Trae Young rumors are coming out, I'm like, are they really going to be able to use those 3 first-round picks and steal Trae Young and get Trae Young on the Lakers because there's going to be no market for Trae, even though Trae is like a really good player? It would drive me insane.
Well, I mean, that would certainly solve their point of attack defense concerns,
Oh
getting
yeah,
Trae Young in the
absolutely.
building.
Yeah.
I don't know. Trae, different conversation for a different day. But Trae is just such a fascinating, really like a poster boy for modern basketball in a lot of
Yes.
respects about how he's viewed and everything. But moving on, I think one team that did not make a move. I understand why they didn't. It makes sense, but I'm a little rueful about is the Pelicans. And I think the Pels, you know, their narrative has been weird the whole season because it's always like I think everyone is waiting for the shoe to drop with Zion and him, you know. He doesn't look like a freak athlete or like as much of a freak athlete as he looked at before. And I think people might be waiting for him to get hurt, all this other stuff. They're also a weird team to dissect because they play like their style can shift. They've been experimenting a lot with how they want to get Zion the ball and who initiates when between McCollum and Ingram and him. I did an episode with Shamit Dua on them like a month ago, and he talked about how all of their trade deadline targets were bigs. You know, Onyeka Okongwu, Wendell Carter, Jared Allen at the time before the Cavs took off, removing Jared Allen from the market. And the fact that they stood pat, I understand because Zion has not yet been to the playoffs. And I think they have so much young talent that they're like, well, let's see what this group with Zion can do. Because without Zion, they lost a series to Phoenix that they really could have at least pushed to 7. I mean, Chris Paul literally went 12 for 12 in a game 6 that the Suns won by 4 to end that series, and they were playing 3 rookies rotation minutes. So I can see where they're just like, well, let's just give us a shot, give us a shot, give us a chance. But that roster, and I just saw that Dyson Daniels tore his meniscus, which really sucks that he'll be out. But they have players to consolidate. Lots of teams talk about making a consolidation trade, but their consolidatable pieces are not very good. The Pels really are, between Daniels, Hawkins, potentially Herb Jones in the right deal. And I know they discussed DeJounte, but that's a team where probably the right star, the right name was not available for them to go in on. And so I can understand it. But again, in like an open year, if they could have overpaid for Onyeka Okongwu, I would have been very into that. I think that this was a chance for them to sort of clear their rotation out a little bit, get a guy that they know is going to be a high minute guy for them that fits with their other players, and sort of like orient their lineup and orient their identity. And I don't think they did that. And so that was kind of a bummer for me.
Yeah, they were tied to DeJounte, and I was like, what are they ever doing?
Yeah, that didn't make sense to me.
Like, I'm like, they're so the rumor I heard was DeJounte and Okongwu was the package, and that they would give up Herb and whatever salary to make the trade work.
Valanciunas, I'm sure, part of it. Yeah.
Picks going out in the trade. And I'm just like, I think David Griffin is really good at identifying talent. I think he's really good at acquiring talent. I think that he's good at drafting. I think that he generally has an idea of knows what he's doing. Unless they're trading Zion or Ingram this upcoming offseason, I think that he doesn't have any clue how to build a roster. It's like, I mean, it's just the reality of the situation. Like, if you're trading for Onyeka Okongwu, who's a good, solid center, who, you know, I know he in theory he can't shoot. Like, he's not a shooter yet at a minimum. And I mean, he shoots in like the 20s again, second straight year. Like, maybe he'll have some seasons where he shoots in the 30s. Maybe he'll improve. Maybe they're betting on their shooting coach like they have time and time before, and it's turned out to work for them. Okay,
Fred
fine.
Vinson,
You could talk me into that. Maybe you'll make him into a Miles Turner level shooter. And
he's a beast from 2, though. I mean, he's shooting like 70% from 2. Really good.
He's a good player, but if I'm acquiring a center, a young center, and DeJounte Murray,
and
not
I have
DeJounte.
Ingram, yeah, no, I'm not.
But this is what I'm saying. The roster building is like, you have Brandon Ingram and Zion as your best player. We know the easy way to build a legit team around them is to put shooting and defense around them. You're acquiring defense in a Kongwu. He's a good offensive center, but he's not quite a clean enough fit for me. And then DeJounte just adds a whole other wrench where, like, unless you're trading Brandon Ingram and DeJounte is going to be your guy, then I just don't understand that fit at all. So, like, once again, good at identifying talent, good at getting guys. CJ McCollum's having like a really good year, low key. I feel like no one's talking about that. And they have a good team. They have like 9 good players, which is not really a thing that teams do nowadays. It's like them and the Knicks are really the only team that has like an eight or 9 guys that you feel like you could trust. But I just am constantly questioning what's going on with the roster building there. And like, I think when you talk about this consolidation trade, if I'm making a consolidation trade and I'm set on Brandon Ingram and Zion Williamson being my best player, I want to acquire guys that are potentially like Derek White types or whoever, like guys that are OG
a Herb Jones type.
Yeah. I like Herb. Like, I mean, Herb's really good, but I mean, Herb would have been traded in this trade.
I
it's
know.
Like, that's part of the reason why I'm like, and maybe they drew the line at him and they said, we're actually not going to include him. But long story short here, I wish that they were just a little bit better at figuring out how to make a good team around them instead of just putting a bunch of talent that doesn't seem to quite fit the level of talent that they have.
I think briefly in Griffin's defense, a lot of that comes down to Zion and like,
it's hard to build
what
around.
the hell is Zion, right? Because he's so unique and singular, and he doesn't shoot threes. And so when that's the case, like, any fit around him is going to be a little weird. But again, the retort would be like, well, we've been pretty good with him every time he's been healthy since his second year. Like, we've been good on the court with him. And so let's see what happens in the playoffs. And if you pick your top 4 seed, they'll be able to be very physical with the Thunder if they play them. If they play Minnesota, and Minnesota's kind of clunky on offense, that kind of bails the Pelicans out of what their biggest issue is, which is putting the right defensive personnel on the floor to complement Zion, who's going to be weird on defense. And Denver would probably take care of him. The Clippers would probably take care of him, although I think they beat the Clippers the other day.
They're another team that could definitely give Harden problems, but at the end of the day, I don't think they could beat anyone in a playoff series except for the Kings. And like, I don't think they're going to get a chance to beat the Kings, which like they own the Kings. Like, that's been the one team that they've thoroughly beaten every time. To me, there's too much issue with the defense on a higher level when you're playing better competition and they can figure it out over the course of a series. And while the offense, they have a lot of offensive talent, I don't really see it all fitting perfectly cleanly together. And look, maybe they have a shot, you never know, but like, that's just kind of where I'm at with them. Like, I like their talent more than I like their ability to win playoff series. Yeah.
I'd like to see them versus the Thunder. I'd like to see, and
rivalry.
We can use this to talk about the Thunder, because I was very complimentary about them getting Hayward, and Hayward's got to start playing, obviously, and build the chemistry. But like I said at the top, history says they're too young to really make a deep dent. But if they're going to win their first playoff series this year as a top 4 seed with home court advantage, then I'd like to see what they would do against a team that is like clearly bigger and more physical than them, and whose best player leverages strength as well as anyone in the league does. So when you look at the Thunder, do you feel as though if you can sort of remove the age factor from it and you look at offense, defense, do you feel as though like their rebounding is just going to not be good enough, and that's what is going, or like, do you think that the fact that they play 5 out and they do such a good job at baiting other teams into drives, and they defend drives so well, and they drive so much to the hoop, like they're their math, as it were, is basically like, we're going to drive all the time and we're going to make you drive all the time, but we're going to drive with our best players and we're going to make your third or fourth player drive a lot.
Our
And
historically good driver.
Shea is a historically good
Yeah.
driver, man.
Yeah.
So like that's their math. So do you think that they have a formula that can win them 2 playoff series or more this year?
I don't care about the age at all. I think that is, I know that we've talked about like going off history. I think that stuff is largely because the majority of young teams that get to, the playoffs, they're just not good enough. Like, this is a unique scenario where you have a guy who has been a top 4 player in the NBA this season, and Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, who is been kind of behind the scenes because no one paid attention to the Thunder while they were rebuilding until they made the play-in last year, but is like in his prime now. Like, he is entering an age where if your best player is 25 years old, I don't really care about all the other guys being super young and being like, oh, well, the youngest team to ever get to the finals, I think collectively was, funny enough,
The Thunder, KD.
I think it was them. And then I think the second one was the Suns with Chris Paul, but everyone else on the team was super young. Because it was like Booker and Bridges and
Ayton's 22.
And like everyone everyone in their rotation was young except for Jay Crowder and Chris Paul, I believe. So that average age, I think the Thunder was the youngest team, and then I think that but what I'm trying to get at here is, if your best player is in his prime, I don't really care about the complementary pieces not having like deep playoff experience. I just worry about that fatal flaw that we've always talked about, which is like the interior size, the rebounding, whatever, that seems to pop its head up every time they play a team with a decently skilled big. And I know Daniel Gafford isn't like Shaq, although he has looked like it in his first few games on the Mavericks. But that was when Embiid's doing it and AD's doing it and Jokic is doing it and whoever. I'm like, whatever, they do that to everyone. Who cares? I'm not putting too much stock into that.
Mm-hmm.
But when it's Daniel Gafford, and it's these guys that are, I think Sabonis had a really good game against them recently. Like, I do get a little bit concerned when we saw it last year where like the league has gone so small in the other direction that sometimes a massive team like the Lakers can come along and just like, they might not be quite as good. And obviously maybe they're not a great example because they have LeBron James and Anthony Davis, but like they can out physical and outsize. And like the Knicks did last year in the Cavs series, they can outmath you with the possession battle. And that's the one thing that really worries me about the Thunder. I like the Hayward pickup a lot too. I know a lot of people were just making whatever. I think Hayward's still a good player. I think that he's someone who fits their identity really well on offense. He's a dribble pass shoot guy. You would like to see him shoot more threes. It's something that has kind of left his game the last few years, as he's been more of an on-ball guy with the Hornets whenever he does get the chance to play. But I kind of chalked it up to like, this is Josh Giddey insurance. Like, if Josh Giddey is just unplayable in a series, we could throw Gordon Hayward to play a very similar role out there, and we trust him to make more open threes than Josh Giddey will against the Clippers in a series or whatever. So that if he can stay healthy, I really like that pickup. This is going to sound like a joke, but like, Bismack Biyombo actually was the best available big on the buyout market, technically. I don't think he's going to play real minutes for them. I think he's another insurance option. But the fact that there weren't any bigs that were moved at this deadline that would have made a difference for them makes me okay with them not getting one. But I would have liked them to see them push in some of the pick haul just to address that one specific weakness in case there was a matchup where they just can't survive. And I think that there's a chance that they run into the Lakers in the first round and it's just like, well, shit, we didn't really plan for this. And like, while that point of attack defense will be an issue for the Lakers, while the half court offense will be an issue for the Lakers, like we've seen in their matchups this year that the Lakers, just their ability to kind of dominate them on the glass and get whatever they want in the paint has been a real problem for the Thunder. And I think it's something that will continue to happen until they are able to acquire someone that you could at least throw out there to match with that size.
Yeah, I mean, the thing about being bad on the glass, it just means that your shots have to go in. I mean, that's pretty basic basketball. If you're not going to rebound anything offensively, and you play a team that values offensive rebounding, that doesn't just concede defensive rebounds the way lots of teams do. So like the Lakers like to offensive rebound. If you play a team like that and you're that thin, you got to make your shots. And I could see, especially in a series specifically against the Lakers, that the whistle will favor the Lakers, as when you look at the free throw disparity, it has throughout LeBron and Anthony Davis's time there. And then, the Thunder are forced to just really make a lot of shots.
Yep.
And so it's a similar reason for them playing the Pels, because the Pels would kill him on the boards, and Zion will definitely get to the line a lot because that's what he does. So I don't know, man. I like your theory that because Shea is in his prime, you don't want to focus too much. You're sort of losing the forest for the trees if you're looking at Chet's age and Jalen Williams' age and Giddey's age and stuff like that. But I do think that when you start comparing fatal flaws, if the Wolves' favorite fatal flaw is sort of offensive indecision or clunkiness coupled with Karl Towns foul trouble, and the Nugs' fatal flaw is like the viability of their bench, and the Thunder's fatal flaw is this physical weakness in the front court. That's the one that I think will really show up quickly, because I think lots of teams are built to counteract and take advantage of something like that.
Who would be the perfect four? So let's just say they want to stick with Chet at the 5, which I assume they do. I mean, it's been good for them. Who would be the 4 that you would have acquired that could have kind of mitigated some of these things, I guess is the core. Or is there a 5 that could move Chet to the 4 that would help with this? Or do you just think that they need to figure out their own identity and not worry about that like glaring weakness, and maybe just like get better at other things?
Yeah, you can't move Chet to the 4 because you've already committed yourself to playing him at the 5, number one. And number two, in order to maximize Chet, you need to give Chet as many mismatches as you can. And
Sure.
all those mismatches are with him at the 5 against slower footed bigs, guys who will react to his pump fake, guys who are slower to close out on him.
It's the
All
Karl
that kind
Anthony
of stuff.
Towns thing. It took him a year to figure it out.
Right.
Yeah.
But I mean, even Karl or Karl Anthony, I keep forgetting that's like his first name is Karl Anthony. But even with him at the 4, he can play bully ball against like strong wings because
Yeah.
he himself is physically very strong and take him down on the block. And Chet can't do that, like maybe never, but he can't do that right now. So the player that it would have been OG, but I
Yeah.
know that they would have been worried that they couldn't re-sign him and all of this stuff, which I'm sure that OG communicated, I'm not going to re-sign with you. And so
It's
that's
exactly
what
what
happened.
yeah.
So
I mean, he
I
wanted
don't
to go
think
to the Knicks. So
yeah, I don't think there was a player this year that would have solved that problem. And I think they hope that they can play Jalen Williams, who is a very strong kid, at the 4 the way that they have been, even though he's only 6'4" or whatever, but he's got the length and he's got all the guard skill to beat you on the other end. It's just that if you're going to do that, then your 5th guy, if you have Shea, Jalen, Chet, and Dort as like your point of attack hound, your 5th guy has to be another like really physically strong guy who rebounds really well for his position. Giddey, for whatever we can say about him, does rebound well for his position, but it's not the same because like Giddey, whatever. I think
I wouldn't even factor Giddey. I think that there's going to be like 1 or 2 playoff series where they just realize we can't score if Giddey's on the court all the time. Like we need to maximize our spacing for Shea to be able to get whatever he wants and Jalen Williams to be able to get whatever he wants. And
so.
that removes Giddey from the equation.
And that reminds me, in thinking about another team that might want Giddey and a team that I'm sure the Thunder, I mean, they could outbid anyone, and I'm surprised they didn't talk about this player. I would have liked to have seen them get Denny Avdia.
Yeah.
Who I'm like, they could have paid the picks to get and whatever. Like, he could be a member of the Thunder right now. But that's a guy who fits a lot of what they do, does rebound well, does guard well, dribble, pass, shoot, the whole thing, and is like a legit 6'8", 6'9". So that would have been the name for me.
Maybe they'll try to get him in the offseason. He's under contract for like 4 years. So
I know, on a really good number. It's
yeah,
all very
it's like
OKC
it's
friendly,
like
but
9% of the cap or something. It's like a
yeah.
very, very, it's like 9 to 12% of the cap. So I think that contract will be easily tradable if they do decide
Yeah.
to move on from him.
And moving to the Washington Wizards and the Eastern Conference title race, which maybe doesn't include the Washington Wizards. Um, I like this sort of theme of fatal flaws that we're talking about. For example, do you think that the Milwaukee Bucks, their own blockbuster acquisition of Doc Rivers, is an absolutely fatal pardon?
Patrick Beverly is not being mentioned as the
I
first.
listen. I hadn't even finished the sentence, Trill. But do you think?
My king.
Do you think? Well, I don't know how you feel. Maybe Doc is your lord if Pat's your king. Do you think that if do you think that Doc eliminates them 100% from making the finals?
No, absolutely not. I look, is Doc a flawed coach? Yes, of course. I mean, I've seen it. The Clippers have seen it. Even the Celtics saw it when they won. I don't think that anyone thinks that Doc Rivers is a perfect coach, but
Uh-huh.
ultimately, to me, the playoffs can be and always will be, or should be and always will be, about your best players playing at the peak of their powers. And despite all of some of their issues with, if anything holds them back from making the finals, it's more roster construction than Doc Rivers to me personally. If I had to kind of diagnose one issue with them, their point of attack defense has been absolutely terrible this year with Malik
Really
Beasley,
bad. Yeah.
Damian Lillard, and I know Pat Bev, who, like I said, he's my king. I love him. He was one of my favorite Sixers of all time, even though it only lasted for 4 months. If he is your acquisition to solve your point of attack defense issues, you're not solving your point of attack defense issues, because Pat's defensive rep is based on where he was at several years ago, more
Yeah.
so. I saw it this year with the Sixers. There were a few games, especially when you played the teams that were a bit more fast paced, like the Indiana Pacers, where Pat was just not able to stay in front of anyone. And my kind of thing that I took from the Patrick Beverly experience was, I think he's an underrated offensive player. I think he's a little bit overrated as a defensive player. But overall is great vibes for the locker room, and will help the Bucks, I think, a little bit, just because they have so few actual, even regular season rotation players they can rely on. By the way, they did get destroyed by the Miami Heat again tonight. I did want to point that out. I know
Yep.
Chris Middleton didn't play, but they gave up 123 points to the Heat without Jimmy Butler, Terry Rozier. So
Yep.
not great. I know
Nope.
they've been performing a little bit better recently, mainly in transition defense. They've kind of solved some of the issues that they had with that ever since Doc got brought aboard. But I don't think Doc caps their ceiling. If Giannis is the best player in every series and Damian Lillard doesn't look like a shell of himself, which has not really been talked about all that much this year, but if it weren't for the free throw grifting, everyone would be like, how is this dude's efficiency like way down and scoring is down and all that stuff.
Yep.
But if those two show up for the playoffs and they get relative health and others, they have a shot. Like, I've been kind of low on them all season because of the defensive issues, and I've also been low on them because I think that they're going to have more lack of availability. And even if the guys like Chris Middleton and Brook Lopez and Damian Lillard are playing, I don't know at their age if they are super healthy because of their recent history. But if you have Giannis, you have a chance. And like, I know Giannis hasn't been a perfect playoff performer. If anything, he's probably been a little bit overrated as a playoff performer on offense. But like, I think that if they are to make a run, it's because Giannis does what he did a few years ago. And after kind of an up and down first two series he had in that playoff run, he kind of put the team on his back, and they made a run. I just don't think this team outside of him is particularly good enough to do that in this NBA, to be completely honest. And I don't think that Doc was doing it. I don't think Griffin was doing it. I don't think any coach would have solved the issues that they have.
Interesting. Probably. I think I probably agree with that.
If they hired Nick Nurse before the season, he might have been able to mitigate some of them. I'll say that much. I think
Mhm.
I'm just having seen Nurse for half a season, when he has a semblance of a roster, not when 7 of our players are out like they were for 2 weeks recently. He's a very good coach. Like that might be the one circumstance where I could see it going in the other direction, but I'm just not. I don't think that this roster was being saved by pretty much any coach that was available mid-season.
And I also think, like, when you talk about Beverly, if you play Beverly and Lillard on the court at the same time, like, that's just so small. That's just tiny.
6'6", 6'1". Like, yeah.
Yeah, like you can't really rely on that. But the East, I hate talking about injuries because it's like I don't really have any injury insight, and like, yeah, if guys are hurt, they're worse. But the Celtics are really there by default with one other team that seems to be in relative health, because obviously Embiid's that's a crushing injury. The Knicks are a lot more injured than people are talking about, because I think when the Knicks are good, everyone's so happy. But Randall might need surgery on his shoulder, even if he doesn't get it like during the season, he might need it. And Anunoby is like, he will be reevaluated in 3 weeks. And even if that's great and he's ready to ramp up to come back, they're going to have a very short runway to integrate with Bergson Bogdanovic, who I don't really love as much as everyone else does.
No, neither do I. I didn't get those acquisitions, to be honest. I think if anything, those were let's stay afloat for 2 months.
Exactly. I believe that was a good, like a fine acquisition for the regular season. But in terms of making that all work on the fly in the playoffs to the level that the Knicks aspire to, which is the finals, like I just don't really think it's enough time. And so I think the only team that is a contender that, I mean, I will put the Heat to the side. I don't want.
They're their own thing.
Yeah.
Like I really don't even know ever what to do with them.
Yeah. But apart from them, the other team would be Cleveland. And that's what is interesting to me. Like, it is set up for Boston because Boston is healthy and very good, and everyone else is the walking wounded, except for Cleveland. And so it depends on how real you think that this stretch of theirs was. They're 13-2 in their last 15. The Sixers.
Ricky Council Sixers led them to a victory last night. 2 clutch free throws in crunch time. I don't know if you saw that.
Oh, I saw it, Trill, and you know what a Ricky Council the fourth guy I am.
I know.
I was on your show singing.
You told
me
about him, yeah.
Yeah. So first of all, like that game was a classic, like taxi squad masterpiece. Like Oubre was hitting wild contested shots, lots of above the break threes going down, but you could see the value that Nurse really brings to that team about making sure there's so much buy-in. Like Kenyon Martin Jr., or I guess KJ Martin. KJ Martin played really, really hard in that game. Maxey was locked in the whole time. And I think that the Cavs kind of loafed it, especially in the first half. Thought they they tightened up on D a little bit in the second half. But given that the postseason narrative on them until they change it is one of skepticism because the Knicks really beat them up in the playoffs last year, how ready do you think they are to take a leap?
Well, Donovan Mitchell's incredible. I mean, that's always the thing that I know that he gets a lot of shit because of how everything got ended with the Jazz and how last year went when they lost in that series. But he might be the most underrated player in the NBA, which seems insane to say, but like on any given night you catch that guy and oh my God. I mean, last night he had like 36, 6 and 4. He had 3 steals. He was active. He was everywhere. Like he's just an incredible player. And I think that he is probably one of those guys that is underrated just in terms of like his ability to set a floor for an offensive team. And some of his playoff weaknesses, I kind of look at their last year, and I think we talked about this where we were both just like, the Suns and the Cavs just need another transaction cycle. Like they just need the ability to, and the Suns went in the other direction and were like, instead of getting role players, we're just going to get Bradley Beal. Whereas the Cavs used it to take flyers on Sam Merrill and your guy, Craig Porter Jr., and bring in George Niang for added spacing and Max Strus for added spacing. And and they were able to build a roster where they have real NBA players from 1 to 8 now. Like, will those players hold up great in a playoff series? Yet to be seen. We'll get a better idea. I think there's really only like 4 or 5 guys that you would trust from that team in a playoff series still, but they have more kind of darts, if you will, to throw at
I will. Thank you, Trill.
a random team to kind of figure out on the fly whether, like last year, like we were like, who is their 6th man, like, or 7th man? Because beyond Levert, it was very confusing on like who even could play in the playoffs. And now I feel like they at least have a shot. The obvious issue for them last year was the rebounding and the extra possessions created by the Knicks and the fact that they were able to just destroy them inside. But in addition to that, it was also the fact that they just didn't have the proper shooting. And if they didn't have the proper shooting and they lost the rebounding battle, the offense is going to be clunky as hell. It's not going to be able to, Mitchell and Garland aren't going to be able to kind of get into their bag in a way that they would want to in a playoff series. And their spacing being as bad as it was last year. Now you add in Strus, who, look, I know Strus's shooting isn't quite as good as it seems. Like, he's more of an all-around jack-of-all-trades guy than just like a shooter, but he is a reliable spacer at a minimum. Merrill, if he can stay on the court, is going to provide them with spacing in a playoff series. And like, I think that they are better built for the playoffs this year than they were last year. I think Donovan Mitchell's even better than he was last year. It really just comes down to me for pretty much every team. Can they get enough stops, and can they figure out a way to keep their spacers on the court in a random playoff series? And I think that they have a better shot of doing it this year than they did last year. And the health thing is big. Like, the Bucks have these little injuries here and there because they're old. The Knicks have current injuries going on. The Sixers have the biggest injury of them all. And the Cavs, so far, I know they just had their recent little thing with Garland and Mobley, but now that they're back, like, I'm assuming full health from them. And I think that to me, they're probably the team. I would have said this a few weeks ago about probably about the Timberwolves, where I'm like, they could lose in the first round or they could be in the conference finals. I feel pretty confident about them winning a series. The Cavs are the team probably more so where I'm like, they get the wrong matchup. I could see them losing in the first round, but I could also see them making it to the conference finals and giving the Celtics a real, nightmare of a series.
I think they're my most interesting team in the league right now. I'll probably do an episode.
Second straight year.
Really? Is that what I said last year?
Last year, I remember at the deadline, you talked a lot about like them being one of the more interesting teams.
Oh, hell yeah. Go Cavs. Anyway, my brain is a little bit, it's focused on the imminent future. That's what I focus on, is the imminent future. But the Cavs, you mentioned that Mitchell might be the most underrated player in the league. This is just a quick aside. I think about Donovan Mitchell a lot when doing draft evaluation, not because like he's replicable, because he isn't really, but because he's not a lead guard, but he is also undersized. You will find lots of bucket getting guard types in college who have NBA aspirations, but like there's one kind of one this year on Baylor named Jacoby Walter.
Yeah.
Who volume shooter, kind of more of a Jordan Hawkins type, like a movement shooter kind of guy, but like bucket getter, good productive freshman. Keontae George was kind of the same way at Baylor last year. And you just look at the difference between Mitchell and those kinds of players. And it's just like multiple football fields away of talent in terms of strength, athleticism, shooting off the dribble, driving and finishing skill. Like he's not one of one, because you do occasionally come across like a Jaden Ivey who like has some of the same juice, but it's just so hard to get to his level playing the way that he plays, because the NBA is so tailored towards minimizing that skill set. It's the NBA wants ball handlers to be able to spray to shooters and be these really high level playmakers. And Mitchell's not bad, but that's not his best talent. And they want all of their best scores to get bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. And the fact that Mitchell sort of flies in the face of that and the Cavs are still really good is just so interesting to me. I
Yeah.
also think that a player that to me is in line for the most underrated player in the NBA, including by me, is Jared Allen. Because I said on this show, when I talked about the Pelicans and Schmidt was talking about trading for him, I was like, I think Valanciunas is a better player than Jared Allen, like full stop. And this was right before the Cavs like ripped the face off of the NBA, which is one of my worst takes I've had in a while on this
Already.
show.
It's been a month.
Yeah, yeah. If
No,
you're gonna be
Jared Allen's good.
wrong, just hit the wall immediately.
Yeah, exactly.
But like Jared Allen averages, I think, 3.5 assists a game. He is just such a smart player in the lane. And he has made this switch that the Cavs have done this year where they play him and Mobley less, some of which by necessity because that injury. And they're doing these lone big lineups. And he is so useful because Garland's a really good driver. Mitchell's a really good driver. Okoro, when he plays, like he likes to drive because he doesn't like to shoot that much. He gets into the lane. LeVert is a drive first guy. All these guys get downhill. And when they dump off to Allen, Allen is great at vacating the right kinds of space. And when he gets the ball 10 or 12 feet in, he makes the right decision like every time. If he's kicking it or if he's going to try to score, how he's going to try to score with his footwork, he's just on it every time. On that last play last night where the Sixers won, Mitchell went in and he was just wide open for a dump off. He positioned himself perfectly for a pocket pass and Mitchell didn't hit him. Mitchell had been incredible. I know why he tried to hero ball his layup in.
Yeah.
But like he should be touching the ball every single offensive possession. That's how good I think Jared Allen is. Now, how that manifests itself in the playoffs, and by the way, on that last offensive possession, Mobley was off the floor. So there's also a tension as to how they're actually going to figure all that stuff out in
when
crunch
everyone
time.
ramps up their minutes too. Like
Yes.
how do you make that pairing work in a playoff setting? It's a little bit more complicated. If Mobley can actually make his open threes like he has been recently, it changes the calculus a little bit.
It does, and I think they are. I'm not going to get into them versus the Celtics like matchup wise now, but I think the Cavs are very, very good. I don't know that it all comes together because I don't know how much faith I have in Bickerstaff as an offensive coach to figure out that central question. But with the amount of guys that can get into the paint, the shooting talent that they have, and just sort of that anchor in Allen, I think that Knicks series, the Knicks obviously like won that series. They took it from the Cavs, no question. But I also think that has led to sort of an underestimation about how good the Cavs can be. And I
I
think
think
they
they're
can
really
be
good.
very, very good.
The thing with Allen, I think that goes a little bit just beyond like the kind of decision making and passing part of it is there aren't many bigs that are his size that have the touch that he has, like from
So good.
the elbow in. Like it's pretty much like it's not Jokic. Jokic is the goat at that, but like he is a tier or two down from that. He is so good at getting, like you said, he makes the right decision. But if you get him the ball in a spot, he will always hit in that little floater range. Like I never see him miss it. And even if he does, sometimes he can get his own rebound and put the ball back in the basket. He's a really, really underrated player. And I think part of that is due to the narrative that came out of, Mitchell Robinson and destroying him on the glass last year. And I think that they took that opportunity to say, let's make our team, let's not necessarily address all of our issues. Let's just build on the skills and the strengths that we already had and add more shooting to this. And yeah, I think they're going to be a really good team. Right now, I think they're the 2 seed. The Bucks lost again tonight, so they should stretch out their lead a little bit more. There's no one in the play, and I think that could beat them in a series. But of course, they always have the heat factor of like,
right.
You never know.
I would love a Cavs Heat first round series.
I had that before the year. But it was my 4-5 matchup. I'm sorry, my 3-6. It was my 3-6 matchup. I had the Cavs in the 3 seed, the Heat in the 6 seed, and I said, I think that the series goes 7. And I don't know who wins, but I think the series goes 7.
Because like that is if you want to exercise sort of playoff narratives about your
Yes.
toughness, if you beat the Heat, then that all goes away.
Yeah,
And I
exactly.
like with all of the Cavs size, I would have to imagine that they would have a real edge in that series, but whatever. I don't want to
Yeah.
talk about
Well,
the Heat.
but I just want to give one thing on this. Our ongoing thing is like we've spent like an hour and a half, whatever, 2 hours here, talking about breaking down every contender with, oh, here's their strength, here's their weakness. We do this all the time with every single team.
Mhm.
Celtics, Bucks, Sixers, whoever. And then we talk about the Heat, and the Heat is just like, man, they're tough. That's all we have to say.
Yeah,
They're tough. They have devil
we can just
magic.
read the paint, the message they
Yeah,
wrote on the paint.
exactly. It's like,
It is the
oh yeah, all their weaknesses somehow don't matter in April and May. I don't know.
No, it's more like I tried to do a Heat episode earlier this year, but I couldn't get the guest lineup to do it. I'd still like to, but I did watch them pretty closely. And what is amazing about them is they on defense, they force turnovers at a high rate, but their foul rate is very low. And
Yeah,
typically those two things are correlated because you got to
it's
be
nurse ball
aggressive.
too. Yep.
And so it's more about, well, do they kind of get there from coasting on their reputation and they get the benefit of the whistle a lot by dictating the terms of engagement? I'm sure that they build a lot of that in, but Bam and Jimmy are just, I mean, they're just excellent defenders. I mean, they really are. And so if I would say in terms of their flaw, even though Jaquez has been so good, if you're playing again another rookie big minutes and another rookie who's not a high volume 3-point shooter, hit like Jaquez prefers mid post and in as well because he's a polished post scorer. And you're having split the court, or pardon me, share the court with Jimmy and Bam.
Yeah.
It's just like, how do you really win the offensive math? That's more the question. You have to remember in that run they went on last year, uh, Celtics series notwithstanding, I mean, even in that series, as crazy as it was a game 7 on the road, and Jason Tatum like sprained his ankle 30 seconds into the game, which
The
obviously is
Celtics
gonna.
needed a little bit of devil magic themselves to get to that game 7, though.
They
The
did.
Derek White play was like a historic. If they win that series and win the finals, like that's like an all-time play.
Right. Right. I remember it was incredible,
Yeah.
unbelievable play. But that series against the Knicks, like they just happened to play, and even against the Bucks with Budenholzer, like they played teams that are like very uniquely stuck in their ways with how they approach a playoff series and how like what their defaults are. And against the Knicks, they played a team that they could cheat off of Josh Hart and RJ Barrett all the time.
Yeah.
So there wasn't a really good offense to like truly stress them. Even the Celtics, their playoff issue is their offense in clutch moments because they tend to, tense up. So if they were to play a team with just like a good, solid top 10 offense that just has solutions, and you would hope that the Cavs do with all of their shooting now that they have around their bigs, like I think the Heat would be in a lot of trouble, but I have been
You
wrong
can't
before,
never.
certainly
Yeah,
about
I
that.
could never. Look, we could use logic all we want. You can't. You can't with the Heat sometimes. That's just the
Oh
reality of
man.
the situation.
What do you think about Buddy on the Sixers for maybe not even for this playoffs, but for like, do you think they resign him? What do you think is the thought process there?
I mean, he's been incredible so far. You watched that Cavs game last night. I was like, I
Yeah, you have
don't
like
ever.
8 assists. Yeah.
Well, yeah. He's averaging 6.7 assists in his first 3 games with the Sixers, which is an underrated part of his game that I never really knew. I don't know if you remember this, but when the Halliburton trade first went down, Halliburton had missed some time after he was traded to the Pacers, and Buddy ran point for a little bit. And I remember that season being like, oh, I didn't know Buddy Hield could pass because they just never let him run offense really with the like it was just like he has been generally more of a move off the ball guy, a spot up shooter. He has crazy range, but he's never really been a guy that I knew would be able to scale up at all offensively if you give him the ball. And like he can make these little pocket passes. He made just like a few great reads in his first few games so far that I never anticipated from him. He doesn't really have like a manipulative handle. He's not like a bursty guy that can get downhill all the time, but he's a smart player who knows how to leverage his shooting gravity, where like you'll always see the way that a player will close out on him, or just kind of how you have to be positioned to guard him. And the way that they do, because they're always worried about him pulling from three, he's able to leverage that and get by guys pretty easily. And that opens up things a lot for his game in a way that I had not really known, not having watched him every single night. I've always known he was a good offensive player, but I didn't really realize the ability that he has to give you when he's moving off of the ball. And then occasionally when you're down your best players, you can throw him the ball and he can do a little bit with it. And it certainly helps when he's hitting every pull-up three like he did last night. But so far the Buddy Hield experience has been great. He's a limited defensive player. I don't think he's quite as bad as his rep. Like the way that people talked about him, I thought he was going to be like
just turnstile. Like,
yeah, I mean, I thought he was going to be like the way that people talk about Bojan Bogdanovic's defense based on a series that happened 6 years ago against LeBron James. When, by the way, LeBron James, I don't know if you ever looked at his stats in that series, but he averaged like 32 a game on like 70% true shooting. I don't think Bojan was really giving him any problems. I think it was just the rest of that Cavs team was not very good. And the second leading scorer was Kevin Love, who scored 12 points a game in that series. So I thought that he was going to be that level of defender. Like, I think that he gets deflections here and there. He causes turnovers. He tries really hard on that end. I just don't really think he has like the physical tools to be able to just throw him on whoever and he's going to get you stops. But it hasn't been quite as bad. And he falls asleep off the ball a lot. But like, that's like kind of a hallmark of every player on the Sixers. So I've become used to it at this point. But I think he's a great fit for what they need right now with Joel out. That's been my whole thing. Is like they didn't give up a first round pick. They only gave up 3 seconds and expiring salary of players that weren't playing for us anyway. And they got a guy who can, in certain situations, start for them, can scale up a little bit without Joel. With Joel, I think he's going to be fantastic as a dribble handoff partner potentially. And with him and Maxey in the backcourt, when they're able to make that work defensively in certain matchups, the offense is going to be really hard to stop. Like they just never stop moving off the ball. They keep defenses scrambling. And it's something that we've been begging for around Joel Embiid ever since we really ever since we lost JJ Redick. I know Seth Curry was able to fill into this role a little bit for his time while he was here, but Seth he didn't stand a chance on defense. And
no.
And it's not his fault. It was just he's 6'1" and it just was never going to work. And also Seth, as great of a shooter as Seth is, he's not quite the JJ Redick, Buddy Hield, let it fly shooter. Like Buddy's going to put up 8 or 9 threes in a random game, and that could swing it in negatively or positively if those shots are falling. And yeah, his gravity has been crazy. It's opened up the court for everyone else. You talked about Oubre was terrible for like 2 or 3 weeks without Joel, but it was because we had the worst shot profile of any team in the NBA. We had no one on the court who could shoot, basically, except for Maxey. And like Maxey had the ball a lot. So this opens up things for everyone. It makes everyone's life easier. And I'm really looking forward to seeing how he fits with Joel whenever he's healthy.
Yeah, there was a possession last night where this talks about how the different ways gravity can work. Because this was a defensive mistake by the Cavs, to be clear. But he ran a pick and roll with Paul Reed inside the arc. Okay, so maybe it was just like a little DHO or something, but It was Hield gets the ball and he's sort of dribbling horizontally on the court towards like free throw line nail area. And Evan Mobley is the big that's attached to Reed. And I forget who the on-ball defender was, but he's like getting over the pick okay, but like Hield has a step on him. And Mobley, he starts like putting 2 on the ball to Buddy because I think he's so conditioned to be like, Buddy, what a good shooter. Like not realizing you're in the area of the court to concede that. And it was like a very simple pocket pass. And then Reed like went in for a dunk.
I know exactly which player you're talking about because that was like I didn't know he was able to even make a pocket pass is what I was trying to get at. Like I didn't know he had the ability to do these things. So that's been the thing that's been like the most surprising so far.
But yeah, like when you have gravity, it's not just gravity where like the defense has to pay attention to you. Like they will make mistakes in paying attention to you
Exactly.
as well.
And
And
he's
that's
smart
like,
at that.
yeah. And it's I it it pains me, Trill, because had Embiid been healthy, the Sixers would be my pick to come out of the East. That's how
I know.
good I think they
Sucks.
are.
Yeah.
But and I don't know, maybe have we decided on repair versus surgery or whatever? He got surgery. And did he get surgery?
He's almost likely almost certain to come back. Will he
Okay.
be the same? I can't tell you. I mean, he did not have the surgery that will put him out definitively for like 6 months.
That's the
The
repair, right? As
which
a
which is like very rare that they're
right.
even able to do a repair, which is actually better. If they were able to do one, they would have done one. Because long term it would be better for Joel.
So
But
is he gonna be bone on bone? Is that the thought?
I don't know. I honestly couldn't tell you what anything about it, but I do know that the surgery that they did was the one that, it's hit or miss in terms of what guys look like after. I don't think they're going to rush him back by any means. I think they're going to take the necessary precautions. Hopefully they learn from their mistake of not playing a guy on an injury like they did in that game a few weeks ago. And I'm very disappointed in how all of this worked out because Joel was having the best season of his career, one of the best scoring seasons of all time. And it's really unfortunate. But the way that the deadline went, like, I at least can watch the Sixers again. Like, it was getting to the point where without Joel, where the product was just entirely unwatchable. They were getting destroyed by pretty much every team they played, unless one of Maxey or Tobias just had a crazy shooting game. And this at least makes things a little bit easier to watch in the interim. And then long term, if Joel comes back and he's even 80% of what he was, they'll be a competitive playoff team. And
Well,
we'll see.
and in whatever series they play, whether that's just one or if they start to go on a run, I'm telling you, I think Maxey is like he is built for it. He will average 35 in that first playoff series where he's the lead guard. He is so good and like very deserved all-star and all of that. But like he to me is like easily, clearly, like clears is the term that I guess people use now. But he clears Damian Lillard by like a mile to me. Not the same level of player. Like with how bursty he is and how easily he can access his shot, I don't think, except for maybe the very best, like except for an OG and Anunoby, maybe, and even then, I think he gives OG more problems and vice versa. Like he is such a difficult cover, plays so hard all the time, such good touch from every area of the court. I mean, he's incredible, and
Yeah.
he will be incredible in the playoffs.
The last part of his game that really because he has everything from the shooting is crazy. The finishing, the tough finishing is insane. He's gotten better because he's gotten stronger as a driver and just the ability to play through contact in a way that we haven't seen from him before. He loves to go to his floater, which is one of the best part of his games. The last thing that really will put everything together, and you saw a little bit of it last night, where he's kind of figuring it out, but it's good. It's probably will take until next season for him to really like perfect this, and maybe even the season after, is the deceleration and learning how to manipulate teams with his speed and get into the mid range, because the mid range numbers kind of match the eye test in terms of like he takes really tough shots in the mid range because he hasn't really figured out a way to kind of, slow his game down and get defenders off balance. And he's constantly off balance because he's trying to be that efficient player that he has been. But that's the last part of his game where he just becomes like a truly unstoppable scorer. Like he's already, like you said, all-star level guard. And when Embiid is healthy, it's like a perfect fucking match. Like you have the fact that when he's on the ball, there's definitely still some limitations as a playmaker. There's still some limitations, like I said, in that mid-range game. When Joel is there and he can work off Joel and he can either be the on-ball guy for any given possession or the off-ball guy running a dribble handoff, like that is good luck, because there are some games where I'm like, it's like Murray and Jokic to me, like where I'm just like, I don't
Yeah,
know what you fucking do with this.
yeah.
So that's
And I
the
think
idea.
Maxey's a better player than Murray today. I think
Which
he
is
is.
wild,
But
because
yeah,
Murray's awesome, but like Maxey has released, and he's still inconsistent because he's a young guard or whatever, but like for a 23-year-old, he's about as consistent as I can ask for, especially when Joel is out. Like, he can have those random outburst game. Like you said, put the defenders on him. Like, Chris Dunn has been incredible this year defensively for the Jazz, and Maxey gave him 50 in that game. And it is incredible to think of where he was at 3 years ago as a rookie and where he's at now. Is like, I think Mitchell was a guy that you talked about. Like, the development of Mitchell has been like
hmm,
otherworldly, probably even underrated in terms of, like, everyone always brings up like Kawhi's development and Giannis's development. Mitchell's probably one of those guys that's up there in terms of like where he was at in college to where he's at now.
correct.
Maxey's another dude who I'm just like, sky's the fucking limit. Like, I don't want to put a ceiling on him anymore. Like, he's just so good. And I'm excited to see him continue to grow, especially when Joel's healthy. And now that he has this extra spacing with Buddy, if they could ever make that work. And by the way, we did also sign Kyle Lowry, who Kyle's very old, but we saw with Nicholas Batum just having smart players that can shoot and make the right play and try their ass off on defense, that that works really well around Joel Embiid and Tyrese Maxey.
Yeah, no, I think the roster was basically. I mean, you could see if you can upgrade the Tobias spot this summer. I know that
Yeah,
you have
that's
designs
what
on
they'll.
doing
Yeah,
that,
yeah,
but it like that roster's basically complete. I mean,
yeah.
they're I really hope that Embiid can come back and do it this year. But
Yeah,
even if he can't,
give. This is my insane plan that I want for the offseason. If they do,
okay, good.
you ready? This
Of
is
course I am. Yeah,
this is
I'm
this
not
is
ready.
this is my will never happen in 1,000 years, but I would absolutely love it. The Utah Jazz said that they would only turn down offers for Rudy Go or for Laurie Market, and that they didn't view as like a near Rudy Gobert level of picks package.
Sure.
Offer that for Laurie Market and sign Paul George in free agency.
Do you
Do
be able
both.
to have the room to do that
Yes.
if you renounce the right people and you have the picks to
We
pull
could
that
keep
off?
Buddy. We could keep Buddy. We'll have 5 first-round picks this summer. We'll have Laurie Markkanen's contract can fit in. We can offer Paul George a near max contract, and we can sign Buddy Hield to a reasonable deal. We might lose Melton and Tobias. Well, we'll definitely lose Tobias, but I don't care about that. We might lose Melton. It's going to be hard. Batum might retire, but your starting 5 being Maxey, Buddy, Paul George, Laurie Markkanen, and then Joel Embiid. Literally 4 of the greatest shooters in the NBA. 2 of them historically good shooters. Sign me up.
And you know what that would mean is that you would the rest of your roster, the rest of your rotation would need to be so cheap that Ricky Council the fourth
That's
would
right.
be a huge member of the
Yeah.
rotation. And really isn't that all that matters?
He is Daniel House if Daniel House played under control and was an actual NBA player. That's what I have determined so far. I'm like, oh, this is like anytime Daniel House had a good game, it looks like what Ricky Council does on a pretty regular basis so far since he's made it into the rotation.
Yeah, is one of those guys who is like the free throw percentage is good. If the 3 ever goes in, he's a 10-year player,
Yeah,
you know.
it did in the G League. I
Yeah.
mean, sometimes that stuff is like not consistent. And I know that he's only played in garbage time really so far this year, and he's shooting in somewhere in the 30s, like 36, 37%, I think. But he's an NBA level athlete, and the Sixers need those.
Yeah.
I tweeted last night and I said, athletes and shooters, finally. Like, we've never had athletes, and we have multiple athletes, we have multiple shooters, and we have multiple guys who make the right play. That, like, Batum and Lowry with that regard. If athletes, Ricky Council, Kelly Oubre, shooters, Buddy Hield, Tyrese Maxey, D'Anthony Melton, who's also an athlete. Like, we love to see it.
How do you feel about the Jaden Springer departure? Have you been able to collect your thoughts about all that?
I don't really care. I'll be honest. I wouldn't have picked up his option. I don't think he's an NBA player. Like, I tried. I liked him
I
in the
know you
draft.
did. You put in the hours.
I
You did.
liked him in the draft. I thought man, I love a good ball of play. Let's mold him into something player. Defensively, certainly very talented. He might cause havoc if he can ever figure out a way to get his offense up to a certain level. But if you're in year 3, and I know he's still young, the joke has always been his best stat is that he's 21 years old.
Correct. Yeah.
Um, I think that it's hard for me to see a world where a guy that can't really dribble, he can't really shoot, and he has touch, he can't really shoot, he can't finish around the basket, and his passing is not great. That in the offensively tilted NBA, for a 6'3" guard to get to a level, you basically, the only player I could come to the conclusion that reached that level was Alex Caruso. And Caruso is a historically good defender who has become a much improved offensive player.
Mm-hmm.
And that is basically the only pathway for him to become a high minute impact player. And this is not Isaiah Joe. When we cut Isaiah Joe was dominating for us in preseason. He was dominating in summer league. He had multiple rotation runs with the Sixers where he looked like an NBA player. And the whole thing that came out of this was Sixers fans melting down over because he had a really good game guarding Steph recently and he had a good game guarding Luka. But like, it's hard for me to see the offense ever getting there. Like I wish the best of luck to him, and I hope that he can figure out a way to get to become an NBA rotation player, but it was just never going to happen here.
Well, and Caruso entered the league at 22. All of these defense guys where it's like the offense is a little raw, so few of them are one and done players because the offensive skill like barrier to entry is so high in the NBA. So usually they exhaust their eligibility, but that means that they are physically ready to actually defend and ready to go. So if Springer hits, it still probably won't be for another at least a year or two. I mean, you never, if not longer, but
I think he'll be like in his mid-20s if he ever gets to be like a rotation level guy. I did a list where I said, here are the guys that I would consider starter level guards that are better on defense than offense in the modern NBA. Mm-hmm. And it was like 5 guys I was pretty certain are better on defense. It was like Alex Caruso, Jalen Suggs, Marcus Smart,
Herb, maybe.
But Herb's a 3. Herb has been playing on the wing this year.
I guess I think of it, but he usually plays point of attack. He just picks up the best ball handler. So I'm just saying view him that way. But
guard, I'm saying a guard. Like Herb can play at the 3. You're not playing Jaden Springer at the 3. So those were the guys like those 3. And then I was like, Drew Holiday, sure. I think that he's pretty good on both ends, but probably better on defense. Derek White, same idea. Yeah. And then D'Anthony Melton for the Sixers was the other one that I came up with. Oh, and KCP. But my whole thing on this,
KCP's a great shooter. Great.
That's what that's what I was trying to get at, was like all of these guys have one skill on offense where you can point to it, except for probably Caruso and Suggs, where you can point to it and say, that's what gets them to be a starter level player. The defense is the reason they start. This is what keeps them on the court on the other end. Melton's a volume shooter. KCP is an underrated offensive player. Not only just the shooting, but like the actions that he's able to run in his specific scenario with Jokic. All of these guys, every single one I could bring up that is like a legit starter has something that like, it's just so far away from me with a guy like Springer that like, I don't see a road, and I'm not really going to be too concerned about that.
These are draft questions, man. You got draft brain, the beautiful mind. I will. Speaking of which, since you picked up a second rounder, I mean, maybe Maurice sells it. I don't know, but if you're looking for a player that can come in and play next year, that's
Devin Carter.
Devin Carter's going to be in my lotto if he's available. Sure.
Well, we're going to have a pick in that range. I'm saying. So a lot of people gave Maurice shit because he had it's the 40th pick of the draft right now. I think this is the pick we got for Springer. They were giving him shit for saying at the press conference, he said, look, sometimes we keep the pick. Sometimes we trade it for a vet. Sometimes we use it to move up. Sometimes there are a lot of different things you can do with a pick. Right. And we thought that this was a better avenue for us to get better players than Jaden Springer in the next few years. And we want to try to contend in this window. And also, by the way, the reality was it was pretty much a salary dump. Like He makes $4.5 million next year, and we're going to get it off the books eventually. Like, it's just the fact that we traded him to the Celtics is the part that made everyone go insane. But like, if they really like a guy like Devin Carter or someone like that, and they need to move up for him in the
They
draft,
better like Devin Carter. But
I
yeah, go
think
ahead.
that he would check all the boxes for a Morey guy. Like, he's a 3-year college player, I think, right?
3, but he's in like an old junior. He turns
Okay.
22 this spring.
Great.
But yes.
Perfect. This I think that Morey, people always think, because the first 2 picks that he had with the Sixers were Maxey and Springer, that he likes to draft younger guys. It's actually the exact opposite. He likes to draft guys that are a little bit older, that have more proven, like, good analytics. Like, all the guys that we drafted, other than that, like Joe was a little bit older. Paul Reed was a little bit older. Bassey was a little bit older. Pretty much everyone we've drafted. Ricky Council was an undrafted free agent. Like, he likes to get guys that have a little bit of experience under their belt that might be able to crack their rotation on their rookie contract. Springer was the outlier out of all these dudes in terms of draft stuff. So that if there's anyone that's available that fits that mold, that has, like, I thought we were trying to get into the draft to get Trace Jackson Davis or Marcus Sasser last year, or Jaime Jaquez, but those guys ended up going way higher than I expected, except for Trace Jackson Davis, because they fit the Morey mold of, like, high BPM, really good productive players in college, but also you could see an immediate role for them in the NBA.
Yeah. So the other one, if Carter is off the board, if you get Devin Carter, then
let's go.
I will fly out to you and we will, like,
let's get it.
Like,
live pod.
Person. Yeah. But Alex Caravan is a kid on UConn.
Yeah.
UConn, you know him?
Yep. We have a Dread on who is a UConn fan that talked to us about him like 2 weeks ago.
Right. So they won the national title last year when he was a freshman, old freshman. So as a sophomore, I think he's going to be 21 when he enters the league. They'll win it again this year. I will be very surprised if a team besides UConn wins a national title. And Caravan is 6'8" and just great. I wouldn't say great because he's not a great movement shooter, but a really good shooter. And just UConn is better coached than every other team in the country by like a tier. They are all so tough and play so hard, and they're so like physical. Caravan would fit into your rotation very quickly, in my opinion. So
a good way to know if Daryl Morey will like a prospect, if you go on their Tankathon page, and they have mostly green 2-pointers, projected 3-point percentage, like whatever, steals, blocks. Those are Morey guys. Like, well, we went through his draft history on one time, and we figured out like what fits the mold of a guy that he tends to target. And those are the kind of dudes. So that's the kind of draft. If they do keep their pick, which people expect them to trade their pick for this year. I actually think they're more likely to keep the pick for this upcoming draft because they want to try to get a guy on a rookie contract that fits well and they could get for like a decent price, because no one apparently wants picks in this draft anyway. So I think they'd rather take the risk and say, let's draft a guy like we talked about pre-pod, like Dalton Connect, and then there were other guys in that range as well that they could take a swing on. And Devin Carter, where is Devin Carter even projected? He's projected in the 2nd round right now.
Don't get me started. Don't get me started.
He's gonna go higher, right?
Devin he's so, I think Gavoni or whatever had him in the top 20 in his most recent deal.
All right, well, let's get him in that range so that we can get him on the Sixers.
Yeah.
We might need a DeAnthony Melton replacement.
That's what he would. I mean, that is what, if he really hits, he's a Melton replacement for sure.
Yeah. That's what we need.
Yeah. So anything else? Did we miss it? We haven't discussed the Phoenix Suns at all, but that's okay.
I love the Royce O'Neal pickup.
So do I.
Really good. Yeah.
So
for the fact that they had nothing to trade. So the 2 teams that I thought did the most with the least.
You're incredible, Trill. I would have thought that like an extended Devin Carter, Alex Caravan discussion would have ended the pod, but let's just keep it rolling. Let's just keep going.
No, but the thing that I was going to say was that like the teams that I thought did the most with the least of tradable shit were the Suns getting. So the Sixers didn't give up a 1st-round pick and got like a near starter level player, if not a starter level player, Buddy Hield, which is very good value.
Very.
And
I think Hayward's very good value for the Thunder as well.
very good. Yeah. I mean, they just gave up like seconds, and they also got a swap in the Gafford deal, which was another whole thing that I really liked for them. But Hayward was also good value. The Mavericks were on the complete opposite side where they got good players, but they gave up a lot of value to get those good players. And if you want to go back further into last summer, for what they gave up to get Grant Williams in a sign and trade, they gave up way too much value for all this. But the Suns and the Lakers were the two teams. Just getting Spencer Dinwiddie on a buyout for the Lakers, I liked as a flyer, and Royce O'Neal for 3 second-round picks. It was him and Buddy were like the best value deals at this deadline. I think that Royce can be a fifth starter for them. I think that he fits exactly what they need, to be honest. Like, I think that they've kind of punted on the idea of having like a competent, like a really good playoff defense because of the fact that they just have so many. And like, look, Booker and Durant are good defenders. Like when they are locked in, like they're good defenders. They're not stoppers by any means, but they're guys that will be able to, like Booker turned teams over a ton last year in the playoffs. KD, when he still tries, is not quite as good as he was a few years ago, but the rim protection stuff is still there. The help defense stuff is still there for him. And the Royce O'Neal addition is like, look, I talked to Nets fans who were like, Royce can't guard guards. Like you're not gonna put him on a 1 or a 2, but if you have a 3 or a 4 and even sometimes a 5 in certain matchups, people don't really know this. He kind of guarded Joel Embiid pretty well last year during the playoffs. He's really strong. Like there were possessions where he would switch on to Joel and like wall him up in the paint, and I was like, Royce O'Neal, like what? Like,
I have a friend. This is not my story, but I have a friend's story about Royce O'Neal because I have a buddy who went to Baylor, and he and his buddies are all playing pickup one day. And Royce O'Neal like came out and was like, "Hey, can I run with you guys?" And they were like, "Oh, sure, yeah. Like this is awesome. This is like a player on the basketball team." And they were expecting like Royce to just demolish them, but they were playing, and like Royce was like really good, but he wasn't like just crushing people. And they were like,
yeah,
"Man, this guy's like really not that good. I guess he's like not really a prospect or anything." And there was like a timeout, and Royce went and took his shirt off and took off a 50-pound weight vest that he'd been playing with, and then came back on, and it was like boom, 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 boom.
That's incredible. But yeah, he's
yeah. He's good. I think the
deep range.
I need to watch more Suns because I haven't watched them most of the season.
Yeah.
After the first like month or so. But the real question is whether or not it gets back to math again about whether or not their shot profile. Same thing we talked about last year with them is if they have the shot profile to really do it. I would love to see a first round series between them and one of these young Thunder or Wolves, because I'm sure the Suns would be favored even if they're the road team.
Yeah,
I would like to see all of that play out. I think that'd be a lot of fun.
But adding volume shooters, like if they can stay on the court defensively, like we've talked about 100 times tonight, in Grayson Allen and Eric Gordon, and then Royce O'Neal, who is like, when you put him into that spot up shooting role, he has crazy range. Like he shoots near like Dame Lillard threes. Like he'll put up shots and he'll space far out just like Eric Gordon does. And the thing that I like a little bit more about him is the fact that he's a little stronger. He can move a little bit better. He can guard wings and bigs. And then you can also have him as a bit of a connector on offense too. Like he's a pretty good passer.
Oh, he is. No, Royce, definitely.
Yeah. He's
definitely
just to me, he's like a different version of DeAnthony Melton, where like, they're both kind of struggle inside the arc, like especially around the rim area, but they can make the right play. They're high volume shooters and they have different defensive utility, but they have really good defensive ability and they fit on a lot of good teams. So I'll be really interested to see how he looks for them.
Yep, absolutely. Okay. Yeah. Unless there's anything else, I think we're ready to wrap.
You got everything. You got all my thoughts.
Yeah. It's like I can see your thoughts. I mean, I'm really tripping out over here. But Trill, thank you very much. Ball, Patreon, Discord, podcast, all of it. Stream, subscribe, and participate and support. Thank you all very much for listening. This has been Chucking Darts. It's okay to be wrong about sports. Find your dartboard and start chucking. Thank you.
Thanks, bud.